All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to do a little bit of a different video. So I was thinking about rhetorical analysis and how we approach rhetorical analysis. One of the things, much like the literary analysis, is I want to move from this idea that literary analysis and rhetorical analysis are something we only do in this academic environment in a class. And I want to remind us all that these are skills that we use on a daily basis. It's not something that we only do in an English class, and it's not something you're only going to do if you're an English major, right? And in particular, the literary analysis sort of sets us up in a way to do close reading, to think about the components of a paper. But when we move beyond that and we move into rhetorical analysis and our persuasive essay, we're really looking at something that's very, very functional, something that we practice passively, that is sort of unconsciously on a daily basis. So what I want to do is just walk you through an example of how we might engage in rhetorical analysis at a semi-formal level. We're not going to write a paper for the purposes of this video. We're just thinking, okay, we're cruising the internet and we come across an article. So in full transparency, I chose a topic that I find interesting, that is the difference between introversion and extroversion. And if you're not sure, you can pause and go look up a definition of those two. But let's say I'm interested in this topic, which I genuinely am. And so I search, hey, what is better, introversion or extroversion? Now, what I'm bringing into this as a reader, because that's part of rhetorical analysis, who are we as the reader? I am an introvert. It has not changed since I was a little kid. And, whatever personality test I take, introvert, I hit all the benchmarks, right? So I'm bringing into that this idea that I'm an introvert. It's part of my identity. And I'm going to kind of unpack this right now. This is from the Minnesota Daily. Well, I don't live in Minnesota, but introversion and extroversion are not confined to a geographical region. What is interesting is that American perspective of introversion and extroversion is probably different than other places in the world where maybe it's better to be more of an extrovert or more of an introvert. And I think in the United States, we favor extroversion, people who are out there that talk to anybody, that are really good in social situations and enjoy social situations. Okay, so that is building what we call the rhetorical situation. Who am I as a reader? Where was this thing published, right? We could look at who the author is. So the author here is Kate McCarthy, and I don't know anything about this person, but we could look them up. Now, I can also look at part of the rhetorical situation as being the date. So this was published in October 2016. That means this was pre-pandemic. This is about 10 years old. So it's something that doesn't take into account a lot of things that are happening in our modern world, developments with AI, developments with social media, things like that. So we've got to sort of really contextualize and think about when, where, and maybe even why this was published, why it was written. Now, the other thing that I would encourage you to think about as you're doing any form of rhetorical analysis, whether that's for a class where you're really looking at something from an academic lens, or if it's in your daily life where you're reading something and you just think, why did this person write this? Or why am I reading it? Or who is it for? A lot of the time, if we think just about the title of a source, that can tell us who the audience is. If you see this, just the title here, an age-old debate, introvert versus extrovert, and you are interested, you are part of the audience for this. You're probably interested in psychology. You're probably interested in personality types. If you look at this and you're like, yeah, I don't really care, it doesn't matter to me, then you are not part of the audience for this. And it's that reminder that no piece of writing is ever written for everybody, and it's never written for anybody. So I'm not going to do a full deep dive on this, but I want to give you a little bit of how I might approach this task. So we've got our intro or our title here, and we've talked about where it's published. So let's just go ahead and read the first, short paragraph here. It says, "Who doesn't love a good personality test? The Myers-Briggs test? I'm there. I recall taking it several years ago, praying my results read extroverted." Even from those first few lines, we might notice or even consciously think of what is being done in these first few sentences. The first two sentences are rhetorical questions. Who doesn't love a good personality test? The Myers-Briggs test? What we have to realize is that this is written for somebody who is interested in personality tests, who's interested in that part of psychology, because there are clearly people who either don't like personality tests or don't care. The second question is about the Myers-Briggs test. If you've not taken this test and you've never heard of it before, then you're going to feel out of the loop, which means you're not part of the specific audience that is intended. That doesn't mean you can't read it. That doesn't mean you couldn't go Google Myers-Briggs test and get an understanding of it. But it's kind of speaking to a specific audience that's already in the know. They already have this sort of information. Now, the next bit, I'm there, the author writes. So they are into this topic. They're passionate about it. But the next sentence tells us something really specific. I recall taking it several years ago, praying my results read extroverted. That tells us something. It tells us, again, going back to what is the societal preference, right? In this part of the world for extroversion. So even if we're maybe introverts, we wish we were extroverts because society is telling us that's what's valued. So let's go into the next paragraph here. In my mind, extroverted was equated with charm, charisma, and success. I knew the glamorized quiet boy scenario in The Perks of Being a Wallflower was a myth, so I made sure to fight tendencies towards solitude at every turn. And again, I'm not going to go through every paragraph, but if we look at what's happening so far rhetorically, who might be interested in? I would say probably people who are introverted or think they're a little bit introverted, who are trying to make sense of this preference towards extroversion. And the author is speaking from personal experience. So when they write, I'm there, or I recall, or in my mind, they're inviting us in, and that creates a sense of intimacy or connection with the reader that is a sort of identifying, right? It's very different than starting this with a statistic. Like, I don't know, I'm making this up, but 55% of all Americans are extroverts. That sets a different tone, and it puts the emphasis not on personal experience, but on something statistical, which tends to be more convincing for a lot of people. And they also tell us that, hey, maybe like you, I fought tendencies towards solitude, towards being alone. Okay, so we've got that. Let's just do one more paragraph here. The use of extrovert and introvert conjures up different schemas or different sort of plans, ideas. The extrovert thrives on constant interaction and exchange, while introverts want to retreat inward for reflection and refueling. Kids are encouraged from a young age to be socially forceful, to jump right in and be heard, but some of us don't operate that way. Unfortunately, the ability to and preference to operate like that is associated with success and potential. Now, I'm not going to go on too long because I want to keep this short, but if we think about other rhetorical strategies that the author is using based on their intended audience, we have the very specific and forceful word choice. Thrives on constant interaction versus retreats inwards and refueling, right? Those are very specific word choices that create a specific tone and expectation. Some of us, she says, don't operate that way. that is, again, a nod towards our audience. Hey, those of us that are introverts reading this, we're not like that, right? And then she follows with, the ability and preference to operate like that is associated with success and potential. And I suspect, I'm reading this in real time, that the author is going to tell us that, hey, uh, being an introvert does not prevent one or preclude one or stop one from being successful or having high potential. Now, I'm going to just go ahead and skim down here real quick. And that's it. This is pretty short. Let's just look at this last paragraph for the sake of argument. I haven't read the other part. Uh, Everyone is made up of shades and gradations, and to organize the two teams seems increasingly ridiculous. We can balance Netflix and large parties, one-on-one hangouts, and a lecture hall of hundreds. There's no shame either way. Okay, so whatever they've talked about in the interim, in the middle part here, is sort of explained away at the end, where the author says, you know what, these what we might call false binary, that it's an either or, an either introvert or extrovert, is kind of a false creation, and we're all more dynamic than that, and we may all be able to navigate these things, which creates a sense of solace, right? A sense of comfort for the reader. Now, to review, all we've done here is take a step back and think about who would read this, right? Who is it for? How does the writing speak to that audience? So that's part of our rhetorical situation. Why was this written? Now, we haven't talked about that much, but it looks like a lot of this is connected to media representations and cultural values towards introvert or extrovert. And we're working with an audience that understands that that dichotomy, that either or, that binary, right? So when we do rhetorical analysis, we're really thinking about when, where, why a piece of a text, a source was created, who it was created for, and what we're trying to accomplish, right? All writing at some level is persuasive writing. They're trying to convince us of something. If, as readers or listeners, we can understand why somebody set out to write something, what they're trying to persuade us of, then we can think critically about whether we agree, whether we disagree, whether somebody's trying to persuade us or manipulate us, whether something's opinion. And that is incredibly important, because otherwise we are in a world where we might just absorb something. And if we're not thinking about it critically, we're going to believe it without bringing our own thought process into something. Okay, so there you go. Just kind of a quick overview to maybe wrap our brains around how rhetorical analysis begins to work. And we'll cover this more in class. All right. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.